All right. Well, my mic was acting weird last week, so I'm hoping my mic is working okay today. And if not, well, let's see. Nope, see, it's not working well. It's not a good situation. Uh, hmm. I'm going to actually try to work on this while I'm here. Just kind of annoying. If you're just joined me, let me know if you can hear me. I don't know how to fix this while I'm working. I may have to leave and come back. Hello, 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 hello. Let's see here. Maybe this will work. Hold on. Hello, 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 hello. Am I getting any sound? Well, hey, can you hear me? If you're here, can you hear me? Because I've been having trouble with my microphone and I don't think that it is fixed. I'm trying to fix it right now. Hello, hello, hello. Okay. Looks like we have a microphone that's working. Okay. Well, we'll see how it goes. Sorry for the confusion with the sound. Technical difficulties make me feel so dumb. So, uh-oh, and someone's saying the link is broken. It says Sunday for the next time and links to last week. Huh. Well, I have someone here. It's not good. I see people are here apparently, but I can't hear from anybody. And for some reason, it looks like the link's broken online. So if you're here, Nancy, you're here. Can you hear me? Can you actually hear me? Okay. Oh, link's fixed. Fantastic. Thank you. Let's see what happens. All right, well, I'm going to get started then, and it looks like some folks may join us, and maybe not. We'll see what happens. Oh, the technical difficulty thing has been one of the most painful parts of this pandemic in some ways, because we have so much like writing on it actually working. You know what I mean? Like we have so much writing on if a Zoom connection works, or I've had a couple situations where I've been talking. Hey, Leslie, I've had a couple situations where I've been talking to people in a meeting. That's a meeting that normally would have in my office or someplace, and because of the nature of the work that we do, it'll be, you know, a fairly intense conversation, or a conversation of, and by intense I don't mean like that's not code for fighting. I mean like we're talking about something like, you know, that's going on with people, or we're talking about the direction of the church, or we're talking about the just something that's emotional and confidential, and then it's like choppy, or all of a sudden people can't hear me, or it's delayed. And that's been one of the hardest parts of this work, right? One of the hardest parts of this work is just that right now is just that it's like we want everything to work, because like in normal life, so to speak, if there's a breakdown, we can like we're in it together, so we'll figure out what to do. But when it's technology, sometimes we just like try stopping it and restarting it. Like my microphone, right? I'm using a different mic right now. This is my normal mic, super fancy, got this little thing that's supposed to protect the sound when I pop my P's and things like that, and it's supposed to be like perfect. I don't know what it sounds like now. I'm glad you have sound, but like it just stopped working one day. No cause, far as we can tell. Far as we can tell, no cause. And it says that it's plugged in and we can't get any sound out of it. So it's like stuff like that just happens. And you're like, well, I guess it's kind of weird. My friend Kathy Baggett asked some pretty good questions, and I did not respond to them last week. And so I promised her that I would start with them this week. Apparently my sound is good, and that's good. It is just the microphone from my camera, which is not what I normally use. I normally use this NPR looking thing over here, which makes me feel very professional, you know, like standing behind the microphone. I'm going to get it completely out of the way because it's just bothering me now. All right. But Kathy Baggett asked me some questions. Let's see here. There are two questions that she asked. One of them, I think, is directly pertinent to our life, and one is also pertinent, but not, maybe doesn't feel urgent. It's a timeless question rather than a timely question. How about that? So let's deal with the timely question. Kathy wanted to ask me how we pray for our enemies. How do we love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us? How do we do that faithfully, she asks, and with integrity? And I did talk a little bit about this last week, but I think it's a really important topic. Now, first I want to acknowledge something, that there are people on the margins of our society who have been marginalized by Christians, who, when they seek to upend oppressive and marginalizing cultures and practices, are told, well, you should just be forgiving. Jesus said to forgive, and Jesus said to love. And so I've seen people sort of reject the use of Jesus' words in that way. And that makes sense to me, right? Like it makes sense to reject Jesus' words when they are being used to harm people. But I think what we want to understand is we want to reject the way the words are used and not the words themselves, right? So the reason I bring that up in this case is I heard a lot of people in the last week when our president was in the hospital, which was, I guess, a week and a half ago, but feels like an eternity ago because everything is moving both really slowly and really fast all at the same time, right? That, like I said, we should pray for the president's health, and there was some pushback to that from folks that I know. But I also read a lot of things online where there was a lot of pushback to the idea that, you know, if this is a person who's done a lot of harm and damage, and now you want me to pray for him, or you know, like it's an oppressive act, like it's like someone posted that it's sort of like telling the Egyptian slaves to pray for the Pharaoh, which maybe they're right, it is, and maybe I think that's what should have happened. I don't know, but I want to be really careful how I talk about it. But I also feel like we need to talk about it. I want us to remember that Jesus was one of the disenfranchised, as Howard Thurman called him, one of the disinherited. That he was not a person who was in line to inherit anything in his culture or time or place. That he was not a person who had any actual standing in his culture or community other than that which was given to him based on people like buying into what he had to say and recognizing the authority that God had given him through his miracles and his works, right? So I think Jesus talks to, as a marginalized person, to other marginalized people, saying, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, recognizing that that's where the language is born. So thinking about how to make sure that we acknowledge it and participate, well, making sure that I'm obedient to Jesus is actually the thing. And I hope that I lead a community that seeks to be obedient to Jesus. I don't think we need to do that by forcing people to do things that are harmful to them. So then the question is, how do we ask people to love their enemies and pray for those who persecute them, and not either look like or appear to be or actually in fact be just accessories to oppression, marginalization, and systemic racism and things like that. Like how do we do that? And I think it's a fair question. I tend to personalize these things a lot. The loving your enemies one, for instance, the thing that I've heard the most on a personal level when I've talked to people about the command to love your enemies is, well, what if I'm in an abusive relationship? You know, are you because people have been counseled to stay in abusive relationships by Christians. They've been counseled this, and they've been counseled to stay in abusive relationships as if that's the biblical imperative. And I don't counsel that. I don't believe that that's right. What do love and forgiveness look like in a relationship that is consistently unhealthy and that doesn't look like it's going to change? And more importantly, when that health and dis-ease is based on disproportionate power dynamics. So in other words, what I mean by that is, like, it's not just like you and me are two people who don't get along. How do we love each other anyway? Although that's a good question. That's also a thing. But it is like, if someone has power over me and is using that power for ill, how do I love them, and should I love them, and what's the point? So first I would want to say that I don't believe that people should stay in harmful situations. I don't believe that people should put themselves, I am not counseling people to allow themselves to be victimized by others. It's not what I don't think that's right. And I would also say that sometimes the best way to love someone is to get away from them. And I've had people argue with me on that, but I believe that that any chance I have sometimes of loving you, of treating you or thinking of you with any kind of love can only be done if we are not together, because it's possible that the way that you treat me is abusive, is painful, is damaging to me. And it makes me hate you. It makes me angry. And so, and not just angry, but like protect myself, and unhealthy to be a victim of that kind of abuse. So to some degree, what I would counsel people to get away from those who are harming them. Right, it is. And telling someone, Leslie says, telling someone to stay in an abusive relationship is not great. It's a different kind of love. Yeah, I agree 100%. Yeah, please, I hope I'm making that super clear. Like, I believe getting away from abusive relationships is sometimes the only way to experience love. And that's what I want to talk about is, what does it look like to love your enemy? Does it look like being their pal? What does it look like to love someone who is seeking to harm you, or who is actively working against your best interests? And so I think first and foremost, I want to say our goal is to follow Jesus as Christians. And I've come to believe now more than ever in my life that the work that Jesus is doing in this world is a work of humanization, which is to say, Jesus recognizes and blesses the humanity of the people in front of him in a dehumanizing culture. In the midst of a space where people are commodified or are marginalized or are treated as faceless masses of people, or are called things like sinners, which was one of the titles that's used repeatedly in the gospel, but that person's a sinner, which doesn't just mean that they do some things wrong. It's basically talking like a specific, almost like a class of people. But it's a way of saying to Jesus, that person's not worth your time. Or even a Pharisee, who a bunch of other people would say, well, that person's not worth your time. And then you see Jesus interact in humanizing ways with Samaritans who are historic relatives, but then really enemies might be a strong word, but who have an adversarial relationship and a relationship of animosity with Israelites. Tax collectors who are shills for the man, and corrupt, and in the Gospels. I won't speak to current times. Prostitutes, as we know, but also people who have been in chains, possessed by demons, people who've been visited with chronic illnesses and debilitating things, who are then, because of their situation, are not only, they're categorized as a category rather than a human, and they are deprived of a specific kind of community experience. They're deprived of connection and relationship, right? Then what does Jesus do in every one of those situations? Jesus finds humanity and restores people to the fullest sense of their humanity and connection. I'm always aware of the fact that of the ways that Jesus interacts with people he's healing. Oftentimes it's very clear that the thing that is wrong with them keeps them from being able to be around other people or with other people. And that oftentimes when Jesus heals people, he commands them to go back to their people, or to go to their priest, which is a way of saying, like, get officially like certified so you can go back into your worship community, right? Which sounds kind of ridiculous, but Jesus, a lot of people think Jesus was super progressive. He was, except when he was very conservative. So you just have to kind of deal with the complexity of Jesus in that way, because Jesus is also a person and not just an ideological figure that we can pin all of our beliefs on, right? But Jesus is consistently doing the work of humanization. And when you think of the the meta story, the meta narrative of the overarching narrative of Jesus, his life in the world, life, death, and resurrection in the world. It's a story about restoring humanity. It's not about making us more than human, although there is something to be said for the connection between God and divine that is realized in Jesus. And the connection, and there is language that has been used in historical Christian theology about how, Athanasius said God became man so man could become God, which can be so misused. But the idea was essentially that we would transcend our normal state on some level. But even then, Athanasius is smarter than me, but I'm allowed to disagree with people who are smarter than me, and I agree with him on so many things. But I might disagree with him on this, and would love to have a conversation with him someday, Saint Athanasius, about what Jesusness does to us, what Jesus reality and existence does. I would make the argument that it allows us to live fully into our humanity, right? He also had to sort of work within society, so it makes sense that he was saying, once I'm not here, people might be jerks to you, so you should get certified so they're less mean. I mean, it's true. You make a really good point. I actually said in my sermon on Sunday, I don't know if I said it in the recorded version, Leslie, but in one of the times I preached a couple times on Sunday, and I said, Jesus is a practical person. He's a pragmatist, and people think of Jesus as an idealist, but Jesus is very practical. Jesus is very much a realist about how people work, right? Jesus loves people for who they are, not for who we want them to be. Jesus acknowledges their situation. Jesus ministers to them and cares for them as they are. He doesn't ever say, now you're worthy, or now you're okay, or now you're a daughter or a son. He uses that humanizing language and does things like touch people who aren't allowed to be touched, which maybe in this time of social isolation, we could see it a little differently, right? We might recognize Jesus' words a little differently, and experience the miracles that where Jesus is laying hands on people and talking and or even when he spits into the mud and rubs it in some guy's eyes, like the intimacy even there. We might see that differently now in our culture based on the isolation that we're experiencing. Jesus humanizes people. Jesus is the one who, when he sees people killing him, says, "Forgive them, Father, for they don't know what they're doing," which is a humanizing behavior. Jesus is the one who speaks to others from the cross, who makes sure that his mother is cared for by the beloved disciple, and John, who makes sure that the thief on the cross next to him knows that he'll be in paradise. This is a person who's, from his first act to his last, is always finding the humanity. This doesn't always mean Jesus is gentle. When you look at the way that Jesus speaks to Pharisees and Sadducees, to Herodians and lawyers and all sorts of people that confront him, he can be harsh. He can be curmudgeonly would be one way to say it, but he can be short-tempered. Although I don't know how short the temper is. He's been waiting for thousands of years for people to get it right? But Jesus is not always easy, and he's not always gentle. But even in his critiques of people, those critiques are humanizing critiques in my mind. They are critiques that are based in what the person is. Well, first of all, he's defending those who are being dehumanized. But Jesus is always pushing Pharisees and Sadducees to see that they have a responsibility, which is a humanizing act. He doesn't, to not let them off the hook is a dehumanizing act. To not dismiss them all. And the fact that he will meet with them continually, the fact that in his very last week, he is confronting them and being confronted by them, suggests engagement. The fact that he meets with Nicodemus at night, and then Nicodemus ends up even staying a Pharisee, but being one of Jesus' sort of secret fans. And then it says that he's one of the, Nicodemus, is present for Jesus' burial or after his death to advocate for him, suggests that Jesus is always leaving room open for people, even people to whom he's critical, that there is space for engagement and connection, right? I'm going to read what Leslie said because she's crushing it over here. Jesus could subvert the government and get away with it until he couldn't, but others couldn't. If someone came up and said, I don't have to wear a mask because some dude who says he's holy laid hands on me and I don't have COVID anymore, I would probably not believe them. Modern Jesus heals someone and says, you are healed, but please still wear a mask. Right. Because it's not just the healing from COVID that Jesus enacts in that scenario, Leslie. It is the act of restoring us to one another. And the act of mask wearing in public is actually says more about what you think about people than it does what you think about COVID, right? Wearing a mask in public, and wearing it correctly, by the way, is not about whether or not you believe COVID is real. It's hard to be charitable towards people who still aren't convinced of that it's real, but that's fine. Wearing a mask in public is not about your opinion on COVID. It is about, are you willing to treat people with respect? That's actually all it's about. It's not about freedom. It's not. And the whole freedom conversation is so painful because it's so disconnected. For me, it's, as a Christian, it's so disconnected from Jesus Christ, who isn't about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I mean, I guess I could make an argument for life-giving Jesus, for the Jesus who liberates us from certain things like sin, and the pursuit of happiness is not in the Bible at all. But I can see how Jesus would wants us to be joyful. But that idea of sort of like, I got my rights, it's just not. It's not about Jesus, right? So. I knew you didn't mean me right now. Don't worry. I could put it on though. Look, I can demonstrate proper mask etiquette, right? Whenever I put it on, I always start up here somehow, and then I have to pull it down. But there you go. See, this is okay. This is wrong. This is wrong. This is just ridiculous. Although I do wear it like this when I'm driving sometimes, like just ready to go, just ready to go. All right. Listen, enough of that. We're talking about loving your enemy and praying for those who persecute you. So, because I make the argument that Jesus is about the humanization of people, of helping us to be human, not to surpass humanity, not to transcend humanity, but Jesus blesses humanity. Want to remember that that the story of Jesus isn't that God shows up looking like a person, that God has an avatar, or is sort of dressing up in person's skin, in a person costume. That could be kind of creepy, but you know what I mean. But that God in Jesus, God becomes, at least in some sense, human. That that Father, Son, Holy Spirit, that the Son unites himself with humanity fully and becomes fully God and fully man. There's a becoming in that. There's a unity. There's a solidarity with, not just with you or me, but with humanity, with created reality and with flesh and blood that blesses us. And it means that if God is pleased here to dwell, so should we be. And we don't need to try to transcend our own humanity. We just need to accept our humanity and be it. So if that's true, if God blesses humanity, then how do I seek to recognize the humanity of every person? And what is my hope for all of God's creation? Jesus' argument to love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you is, I believe, in the spirit of the recognition of your enemy's humanity. And while I think I've been very critical of our current president for behavior that I consider to be unchristian. But I think that I want to disassociate with language that is dehumanizing to him. Calling him like the orange one or the Cheeto or I've heard a lot of things. I won't repeat all of them. You get it. I have been critical of our vice president, but some of the things that I've read from people that what it means that a fly landed on his head, I get that it's all in jest, but it's just not loving. It's not humanizing. That's what I really mean. It's not humanizing. What does it mean to humanize someone? Oftentimes people think it means to bring them down a notch, but that's not what I think humanizing does, I think, at all. To recognize the God presence, even in those we cannot agree with, and even in those that we ought to oppose, is the thing for me. It really is. Like another one that's very much in this line is, I think that the conversations around how police people, the conversations around policing and what proper policing would look like and what a proper police department how it might operate and what appropriate procedures would be, and acknowledging, I think that conversation is really necessary. And I think acknowledging some of the shortcomings and some of the ways that we're doing that as a society right now, and some of the racism that's been baked into that system, just not at all to say that if you're a police officer that you are a person who says, I am racist. I'm not saying that, but that the system, the way that it's perpetrated and the way that it's held up, enforces a certain kind of racism that we become participants in, whether we want to be or not. I want to have that conversation, and then I'm with friends of people and having these, conversations, and then they'll be like, there's a hashtag out there that you've seen, ACAB, which is like, all cops are bastards. And I'm just like, yeah, man, I can't get on board with that language. It's not okay to me. And it's not because, and then like, so you're on the side of the oppressor. And I'm like, oh man, we've got to come up with a way to move forward in opposition to things that need to be opposed, that does not resort to the dehumanization of those with whom we are in disagreement, even those we might consider adversaries, even those we might consider enemies. How then do we love our enemies? So I think part of it is that work of recognizing their humanity, even as we work against them. And I think some of it is like when it's like pray for those who persecute you. Like, I think let's say you don't like the president. Let's just hypothetically say, because I know many of you do not. And let's say that you are worried about the damage that he's doing, and that if he gets better, quote unquote, right, if he gets healed from this virus, that he will continue to do damage. Therefore, we shouldn't pray for his well-being. I get it. I think I get it. But I think we're supposed to pray for his well-being. I also think that when you read our prayer book, the prayer for the president is a prayer that our president have the mind of God, and in the sense of enact to occupy that office in a way that is just, wise, loving, and merciful. Why would I not want to pray that for Donald Trump today, or any president today? Would we not continue to pray that the person who has power over us be influenced by God? There's another piece to this I want to talk about. And it's the harder part even than everything I've said before. Because I have the capacity to sound like a real moralizing drip. And a disconnected and overly privileged sort of pie in the sky Christian. I'll get to that in a second, Leslie, for sure. I believe that praying for people we don't like or agree with, or who are our enemies, or who are painful or abusive or marginalizing or oppressive to us, with whom we have dysfunctional relationships, I think it's meant also to do something to our souls as the ones who pray it. To become a person who prays for your enemy should not mean that you are therefore acquiescing. The civil rights movement in the 1960s is not monovocal. It's not just one voice. It's not Dr. King, so to speak, and no one else. But it's also not as simple to say Dr. King or Malcolm X and you got to pick one. It's not simple to say that. It's not fair at all to put them at odds with one another. There are multiple voices within that civil rights movement. James Baldwin is one that I'm continuing to learn about and fall in love with more deeply every day. But the reason I bring that up is to say there are a good number of people within that movement who believed that it was their job to both seek to love their enemies and to fight. That in fact, the only way to love them was to fight. Now, it wasn't necessarily physical fighting. There was a lot of nonviolent work that was done there, but to fight the system and to oppose strongly the voices of oppression, but to do so from a place of recognizing our commonness, our interconnectedness. When I say that Donald Trump is this, this, and this, and I'll never be that, or if I'm a person who's on the conservative side and just want to call Joe Biden names and I could never be like him, or Nancy Pelosi's a favorite punching bag of people. When I do that, I make it sound like somehow they're capable of things I'm not. And one of people's biggest complaints is about the president is his dehumanization of others, which I think is clearly attested to. And I don't need to, if you think it's partisan for me to say that, like, it's not. But like thinking about, so do we dehumanize someone because they dehumanize people? And we're mad at them for dehumanizing, so we dehumanize them? Part of what Jesus is doing is trying to force us to break the cycle of hatred that exists and perpetrates so much violence in this world and perpetuates violence in the world. So praying for my enemies is also about my own soul. What kind of person do I want to be? Do I want to be a person who is praying for anyone's death? Do I want to be a person who is praying for someone else's pain and suffering? When I'm praying for someone's death, for their pain and suffering, where is Jesus in that? Now, that being said, I don't want to place burdens on people that are too big for them to bear. That's the Jesus complaint. One of the Jesus critiques of the Pharisees is you place burdens on them that are too heavy. So if you're in a place where you just literally cannot pray for your enemy, you don't know how, and you can't fathom it, and it's too painful to even consider, then okay, don't. But I would want us to be able to explore together, what is it about the pain you're experiencing that, like, how could we address that pain that renders us unable? There's something there for us to look at and to care for each other through. Wesley says, a lot of people pray for things for people. Is it bad to just extend a general, I pray for them, and not specify an exact prayer? I don't think it's bad. I don't think it's bad. So I'll start there. I don't think it's bad. I wonder what we think we're saying when we say it. So if I said, I pray for this person. I pray for Joe Biden. Okay, well, what do you pray for them? Now that's me. I could be wrong. Could be that just saying that's fine. Could be that just to utter in prayer the name of someone who is your enemy or adversary, or someone with whom you have real problems, maybe just to remember them in your prayers is enough. But I want to, but sometimes I worry that people I pray for them, that they'll learn their lesson. I pray that they'll finally get on the right page. That prayer could end up being like a loophole for how to love people conditionally, right? And that might be something, I don't know what they need, but whatever it is, pray for them. That's an interesting idea. I pray for this person that they might get what they need. That's fascinating. It's a tricky conversation. I really do think that. I think love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you is one of the most difficult things Jesus ever says. It's why we still to this day are trying to find ways around it. And I think we think in terms of, will this one event solve the problem? But what you just said, to give me an insight into others' humanity, is actually, we're in the middle of, we're constantly developing, and our relationships are developing, right? So maybe that in and of itself is something. And maybe God will do something. We are praying to God after all. Maybe God will actually step in and intercede in some way that we could not imagine. I've had, just yesterday, I had an intercession that felt like God from me in a relationship that's in my life that is in a bit of a bad place, a tough spot, and it's been perplexing to me for a while now, and painful, right? And I had a sort of inroad in one of these relationships that was unexpected and really powerful and meaningful to me. And I felt like God's presence was there. So, and this is a relationship that I've been praying for and thinking about a lot lately because of its dysfunction and because of my pain around it. And so to have something kind of shift around that was out of my control, that's interesting to me, right? Right, and you just said it. We may not love each other in a platonic relationship way, but I can still extend my understanding of God's love to them, not verbally directly to them, because that's just going to make things worse. And that's true too. When you look at the 12 steps in AA, which I'm a huge fan of that work. Fan is a funny word about it, but I'm an admirer of it. I've never worked the steps myself. I did attend Al-Anon for a while, but I just couldn't. I never got to the point where I really worked the steps, but I was always, I have a great amount of respect for them. I'm just trying to be as transparent as possible around that. But one of the things you learn about is there's a step about making amends to people and it says where possible. And the acknowledgement is that there are places where it's not possible to make amends, either because the person is gone or because to reapproach the subject with them might actually be more painful or might be dangerous for you. That somehow there are places where you might not be able to make amends, or that the other person might not be up for it. Yeah, so that's something to look out for, right? I think that's what I want to say about loving your enemies for now and praying for those who persecute you. I do not believe it is meant to be something that is conditioning us to accept our mistreatment. And I do not think it ought to be used by people in power as a cudgel against people who are disenfranchised, disinherited, disempowered, to say, well, you should be praying for your enemies. I had someone, we were talking about some of the anger and the uprising in the aftermath of the George Floyd killing, his murder. And someone said, well, as a Christian, what about forgiveness? And I was like, how do we think forgiveness works? Forgiveness, King calls forgiveness a love in action. When he describes love in action, it's forgiveness, which is an acknowledgement that so much of what's required for us to be able to be in right relationship is the letting go of transgressions. And I understand that, but there's an expectation of a certain level of mutuality if we're going to move past anything. Expecting others to forgive something that keeps happening to them, right? Is placing a pretty heavy burden on them, and places no burden on the society that continues to kill black people at a rate that is much higher than it kills white people. Like, society, our culture, our country has work to do. And how do you forgive a culture? I mean, I guess by staying in it and being willing to work on change. That might be an act of forgiveness rather than just trying to blow the whole thing up or bail. Maybe the forgiving act is the one that says, I'm going to stay here and try to help make it better. Maybe that is forgiveness in action, right? So I think we want to be really careful how we use Jesus' words, but I do also think we want to follow them and be obedient to him, and not simply use his words as one more set of maxims that might guide us towards a somewhat, hypothetically better life, or more something, I don't know. I don't think it's that simple. I'm tired of us thinking about Jesus as a hypothetical character who we ask, what would he do if he were here today? I just don't think that's consistent with what the Christian faith is supposed to be. I think that we are supposed to be talking to Jesus right now and seeking out Jesus' presence in our lives right this moment, recognizing not the hypothetical God of somewhere else and how they might feel about what we are doing, if they're even there, but the actual day-to-day interaction with God that Christ has enabled and empowered us to have, the one that the Holy Spirit equips us to experience, so that we can ask the question, where is Jesus now? And what is our part in participating with Jesus in the work of the world now? Jesus is not a hypothetical. Jesus is not an embodiment of Aesop's fables, or just a simple teacher. It's not a set of stories of once upon a time that if you read them right, you might live a better life. The Christian argument is that Jesus is God, and God is alive and present in our lives right now. And that by the power of Jesus, you and I have been connected to God eternally and fully, and that we have the capacity to live into the love for which we were made in ways we never could have imagined. But we do that in partnership with the God who is reconciling this world. It doesn't work. The Christian worldview doesn't work if it's all about what you do and not about how God is present. It doesn't work if it's just a set of maxims or rules or traditions. It works as a living, breathing reality that we share, right? Okay. I got 8 minutes left, and I didn't even get to any of the other stuff. We started a little late today, and I went off there a little bit. It's what you would do that matters, because that's the person you are. If you would hate and hurt, you might want to work on that as a self-aware person. I would think that, so hurting is a part of the picture, I think, in that. I think that Jesus wants us to I think that Jesus acknowledges our hurt, but wants us to move through our hatred into some other space with people. Oh, got it. Yeah, it's just like thinking about wanting to hurt others at all is almost always, as far as any time I've experienced, it's really about my own pain. Yeah. Kathy Baga wants to know about substitutionary atonement, for or against. About 6 minutes. Can I do that? Probably can't do that all in one day. Do I think that do I believe? Oh, so, but I mean, here's my answer for it. I mean, it's scriptural. It's so clearly scriptural. I want to make a difference between substitutionary atonement and penal substitutionary atonement. They are different. The idea that God needed to penalize someone, and so Jesus took the hit, so to speak, on behalf of humanity, I don't think works. It requires that we have sort of a God who's filled with bloodlust and must be satisfied. Atonement means reconciliation. Atonement is the act that needs to occur so that things can be made right. When things have gone wrong, what is the act that needs to occur to make things right? It is almost always in scriptures a sacrificial act in some way, an acknowledgement that to make things right requires sacrifice of some kind. And in terms of its being substitutionary, there are things that Jesus can do that we cannot do. We are not capable of atoning, of making things right with God. Just to be super clear, like, we're not capable of it, you and I. We're not capable of making things right between God and us, because we don't have what it takes. I'm not trying to crap on humanity. I love us. But we don't have what it takes to heal the wounds that we have created in our relationship with God all by ourselves. It takes God's help and assistance. It takes the power of God to get things right. Jesus, as fully God and fully human, steps into the space, into that breach, and does the reparative work that we cannot do to make things right. This is the crux of substitutionary atonement. There's the conversation that's separate about penal substitutionary atonement, the idea of being penalized that I've already mentioned a little bit at the beginning. And I think you can reject that. I think we're free to reject that. But I've seen a lot of Episcopalians and so-called liberal or progressive Christians just reject, quote unquote, atonement altogether. I remember once I was sitting in on a class that a guy was teaching, a priest was teaching, and it was his class, not mine. So I just kept my mouth shut. And he was teaching, and he was basically saying that there were two kinds of theology. You could be into substitution, and you could be into atonement theology or incarnational theology. And he put those two up against each other. Atonement theology being that Jesus is this, shows up to atone for our sins, which is accurate. Or incarnational theology that says Jesus' presence is about his humanity and how he lives in the world, and that the emphasis is there. The idea that these two things are at odds is insane to me. Oh God, I should be a little bit more charitable, but I don't know how to be. The idea that incarnation and atonement are somehow the whole purpose of Jesus is just that he taught us how to live. Nope. No. Because he did all sorts of things we couldn't do. So that's not true. The reality of him accomplishing things that we could not accomplish is actually a really important part of the Jesus story. And accepting this gift from God, our relationship is in ill repair with God. We don't know how to fix that. God knows we don't know how to fix that. God understands that a relationship is a relationship of mutuality. So God takes on humanity and acts in a human way to do the work of repairing that breach. That's the fundamental idea behind atonement theory, which, by the way, may not actually be interesting to a lot of you. It could be way down the road of the really nerdy stuff, but I care about it because how we understand our relationship to God and Jesus, to me, is very important. That we create an understanding that acknowledges our own beauty and our own shortcomings and our inability to fix things ourselves is essential. Because it's honest. It's like watching me at home trying to fix things and stuff's burning down because I'm an idiot. And then I'm like, no, I got this. And it's like, you don't have this. Why do you think so lowly of me? I can do this. No. You just literally don't know what it takes. You're not a bad person. You just don't have the thing. It's not hateful of humanity to acknowledge our inability to help ourselves all the time. And the acknowledgement that those of us, that we as humans were built in a relationship that on some level on every level, but we know that we rely on God for life. An acknowledgement of that is what this is. It's a supreme acknowledgement of our reliance on God, on our dependence on God, and on God's willingness to share in mutual relationship despite our utter dependence. Right? All right. It's noon. I did talk about atonement more quickly than I thought. Kathy, I don't think you're here today, but I know you'll watch it later because that's how you roll. Leslie, you were the only one chatting today. I hope Betsy's okay. And our Lisa's friends, our several Lisas and others. And I hope that we continue to be able to do this and that it's meaningful. I'm sorry for all the technical difficulties at the beginning. I hope that people get through that and watch anyway. It was a little bit, if you're like tuned in at the beginning and you're just watching that, it's almost like someone butt dialed you and you can hear them talking to someone else. You're like, what's happening right now? So it was a little bit distracted and disconnected at the beginning. So my apologies for that. But I'm so grateful for our time together. I'm so grateful for this thing that we're doing. And I hope that you listen to some good music and watch some good television. Oh, Leslie. Oh my gosh. So like a year or two ago, your mom was like, Phil, you need to watch Legally Blonde. Because I'd never seen it. She's like, you've never seen Legally Blonde, what's wrong with you? So she like lent me the DVDs. So last night, so last night we're at home and we're like working on stuff in the house, and Krista's like, I'm like, look on Hulu, let's find something to watch. And then she's like, what about Legally Blonde? And I was like, I've never seen Legally Blonde. And my wife was like, you what? And I was like, I know I haven't ever seen it. And so she's like, well, we're watching it. So we watched Legally Blonde last night. It is glorious. What a fantastic movie. I loved it. I immediately was like, well, we have to watch the sequel now. So I'll probably let your mom know. But if I forget, please let your mom know that I have watched Legally Blonde, that I have loved Legally Blonde. I'm trying to remember. It was so long ago that I'm trying to remember why she told me I needed to watch it, but she was rather insistent. Absolutely spectacular movie. Reese Witherspoon, a family favorite. The Duvals love Reese Witherspoon unabashedly. Think she's wonderful. I'm a huge Luke Wilson fan. I love what he does. I think I just love him. I just love everything he does. Victor Garber's a great slime ball, I guess. The way they worked, like the way they did the Selma Blair, like she's the enemy who becomes not the enemy kind of thing. Like not just she starts out sort of like the obvious like bad girl or villain, and they kind of move in a different direction with that. Just great stuff. Ali Larder, I always want to see Ali Larder and stuff. Great to have her back. I have lots of opinions about movies. You know, I used to do a movie podcast, so in my other life, Legally Blonde. Going to be watching that sequel real soon, real soon. All right, my friends. I hope that you have a good life, a good life. Hope you have a good week. I hope we get through it, and I look forward to seeing you all next week. Thank you for taking time to be with me. I'm grateful for the time with you. Bye now.